Alright lads, today I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial of the naval aspects of War Thunder. We're going to be covering everything from controls, aiming and game mechanics. I will be focusing on naval realistic and will be treating the audience if this is your first time looking at naval. So this video might be a little bit long and a little bit simple, so feel free to skip ahead if you already have a good understanding of a certain topic. I'll leave timestamps in the description below. But without wasting any more time, we're going to head straight in. With the latest new power update, Gaijin is hoping that lots of new players try Naval for the first time. To try and promote this, they have split the single naval tech trees into two. If we take a look into the tech trees and click on the blue water tab, you can see that this tech tree is for the larger ships in game. And if we click on the coastal fleet, we now have all the patrol boats, subchase and frigates now in their own tech trees. Put simply, you can skip all of the smaller ships and get straight into the most iconic ships of the early 20th century. I think this is overall a good change, as before the patch, you had to grind for at least several hours to even unlock a destroyer. Now, you get one for free. Going back to the blue water tech tree, and just like the year and tank trees, we have several ranks. Ranks 1 to 2 are usually filled with early destroyers. The third rank is usually made up of late war destroyers and early cruisers. Rank 4 is the home of our first bigger ships, commonly known as heavy cruisers. And finally, the 5th rank is home to the late war heavy cruisers, as well as the dreadnought battleships. But what do all these classifications mean? Starting with destroyers, they are fast and nimble, but lacking in meaningful armour. They usually have small caliber quick firing guns, excellent for killing torpedo boats, but rather ineffective against larger ships. Light cruisers are typically armed with 6-inch guns or smaller. They have high rates of fire, typically between 8 to 10 rounds per minute, or every 6 to 8 seconds. They do have better armour than the destroyers, and much more crew. This will become important later on. Both light and heavy cruisers have high top speeds, giving them pretty good mobility. But what is the difference between a light and heavy cruiser? Heavy cruisers are armed with guns larger than 6.1 inches, typically 8-inch guns. This does give them more firepower, but the downside being a longer reload. Heavy cruisers can typically fire 4 to 5 rounds per minute, or every 12 to 15 seconds. Heavy cruisers are also typically larger than light cruisers, but don't necessarily have better armour protection. They do usually have high survivability however, but this is mainly due to having a larger crew count. But again, we'll come back to this mechanic shortly. And to finish this comparison, we come on to the dreadnoughts. They are big and slow, with high caliber guns and lots of armour protection. Typically armed with 12-inch guns, they pack a huge amount of firepower, but suffer from terrible long reload speeds. Typically firing 1.2 to 1.5 rounds per minute, or every 30 to 40 seconds. These are the newest ship type in game, and at the time of recording, are arguably overpowered. So now that we have a basic knowledge of all the ship types, let's put a ship in our lineup. If you'd like to know more about the naval tech trees in War Thunder, I highly recommend checking out this video by Flip Stug. He's a great guy that produced a very in-depth beginner's guide for naval. Definitely well worth subscribing to him. I'll leave a link to his channel below. Just like in air and ground battles, the naval side of War Thunder uses a battle rating system, with the same 1 up, 1 down matchmaking parameters. In naval, you can also bring along planes for close air support, so make sure to add some to your lineup. After you've got a ship in your lineup, click on its icon on the bottom and then select the crew tab. We're now going to take a look at the important crew skill points in naval. Starting with the commanders section, and we have 2 big skills here. The first is leadership. When fully aced, it gives you 5% better performance on all other crew skills. Second, the crew interchangeability skill. This is very important and the skill I would max out first. It allows you to lose more crew members and still carry on fighting. Just like in the tank game modes, you have a certain amount of crew on board your ship, and if you lose too many, the ship will die. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but we'll cover this mechanic in more depth later on. Moving to the observers tab, and we have 3 skills here, the most important of which is the air detection skill. And as you can guess, this is the range at which your AI gunners detect incoming planes. The other 2 skills are ship and torpedo detection. These aren't too important, as it's quite easy for the players to see both of these. Next up is the engine room, which has 2 skills. Ship control determines the mobility of the ship, and fire control reduces the chance of a fire to start in the ship's citadel areas, such as the engine or transmission rooms. Next is the gunner section, and this houses some important skills. You can see that we have a reload skill and an accuracy skill for the main guns, auxiliary guns, and the anti-aircraft guns. The 2 main skills I'd put points into here is the main caliber reload speed and the anti-aircraft gunner accuracy skill. These 2 skills should be focused first, as it allows you to fire faster and makes your AI gunners deadly to incoming hostile aircraft. Next we move on to the damage control section, and again, these are important. The unwatering time skill determines how fast your crew can stop a ship from sinking, and the fire extinguish skill does the exact same, except how fast your crew can stop fires. The breach repair skill, again like the other 2 skills, determines the speed at which your crew patch up the holes in your ship, as well as repair damaged components such as the guns or bridge. This pretty much covers all the important skills, and with that done, we're ready to get into a test drive and set up our controls. To enter a test drive, click on your ship in your lineup, and then press test sail. Okay, so we're here in a test sail, and I'm going to press the escape key on my keyboard, and then go to the control section. Starting with the basics, the main engine controls the speed of the ship. I have increase set to the W key, and decrease set to the S key. Next up are the turning keys, and to turn to port, also known as turning to the left, I have the A key binded, and to turn to starboard, or to turn to the right, I have the D key set. Pretty simple so far. The next control to select is the halt key. Pressing this button will bring the vessel to a stop as soon as possible. I have this set to the B key. Next up is the fire button, and this is naturally set to the left mouse button. The select primary weapon key will give you control of the largest guns on your ship. I have this set to the tilde key. This is purely personal choice, sticking with the default Alt+1 is perfectly fine. The select secondary guns key will give you control of the medium caliber guns on board. I have this set to the default Alt+2. The select anti-aircraft guns gives you manual control of the anti-aircraft guns, handy for personally dealing with those pesky torpedo bombers. I also have this set to the default Alt+3. Next up is the ranging shot. I have this set to a button on my mouse. It fires a single gun and allows you to check the range and windage of your shot. You can then adjust your aim depending on where the shot lands. If instead of firing just a single shot, you'd like to fire all the guns from a single turret, make sure to turn turret ranging shot on. Next up is the torpedo launch button. I have this set to the spacebar, as it's quite easy to spam. Below this, we have the controls for dropping mines and depth charges, as well as launching rockets and mortars. I have the first two set to control, and the latter two set to the R key. This means if a weapon is being dropped from the ships, I know it's the control key, and if a weapon is being launched from a ship, it's the R key. There's no need to have several different key bindings for similar weapons. I then have the G key for smoke screens. These hide you from enemy ships, particularly useful when capping a zone. Next up is torpedo aiming, and I have this set to the Q key. It gives you a green bar on screen showing you the travel path of torpedo, making it easier to aim. After this, we have the toggle gunnery targets key. This determines what the AI gunner will shoot at. I have it set to the E key, as it allows me to change it quickly. Next up is the aim mode key. I have this set to the left shift key, so I can press it whilst keeping my fingers on the steering keys. Right at the bottom we then have the shell selection. The first, second, third and fourth ammunition keys are respectively bounded to the keys 1, 2, 3 and 4 on the keyboard. And finally, we have our damage repair keys. The fire extinguishers are set to the number 6 button, the repair key to the number 7 button, and our breach repair is set to the number 8 button. This pretty much covers all the controls you'll need to get started. Alright, so we now know our controls, let's test them out. Starting with moving the ship. If we hold down the W key, you'll see that we max out at flank ahead. This is your fastest forward gear. And if we hold the S key, we'll set the engines to full back. This is your fastest reverse gear. If we look towards the bottom left of the screen and hold down the A key, you'll see a little bar moving to the left. This indicates the position of your rudder. If we hold the D key, our rudder will shift to the right. Controlling ships in naval combat is that simple. If we press the E key, you can see that at the bottom of the screen, our secondary and tertiary gun indicators change. This indicates what target your AI gunners will engage. The plane icon means only planes will be engaged, and the ship icon means only surface vessels will be engaged. The icon with both a plane and a ship means your AI gunners will fire at will. In game, I'd always recommend having your AI gunners set to at least anti-aircraft roles. Moving briefly onto the weapons, and there is one last control to mention. This is the target select button. Aim your cursor at an enemy and press the mouse wheel button. You'll now see white brackets appear above and below the enemy, as well as seeing ranging measurements on screen. This may be the most important control in naval gunnery. Your crew will automatically estimate the range to target, as well as set your guns to that range. This means all you have to do is account for the windage, also known as leading the target. After you have a target selected, press the shift key to enter the aiming sight. At the minute, both myself and the enemy destroyer are stationary. In this situation, aiming right at the destroyer's centre of mass is the best way to get a hit. Aim at the destroyer and press the left mouse button to try it for yourself. But obviously in real games, enemies aren't going to be sitting still making themselves a nice easy target. They will of course be moving, making aiming slightly trickier. As a general rule, and a tip I learned from Flip Stug, you guys should definitely sub to him by the way, is that ships in naval are generally always getting closer towards each other, meaning you should always aim slightly below a target to prevent the rounds from overshooting. Our first example will be us stationary and an enemy moving to the side of us. You can see in this footage that I'm keeping the aiming sight ahead of his direction of travel, having the sight only slightly in front of him. You can see from the rounds landing, we get a few good hits in. So what about the opposite situation, where a ship is coming straight towards us? Well, it's practically the same, but instead of aiming to the left or to the right as we saw in the last clip, In a situation like this, we'll want to aim underneath the ship. Aiming directly at the ship will mean the rounds will go long, passing over him. This is because the ship is moving towards us. You need to aim where the ship will be when the rounds land, not where the ship was when you fired. This is demonstrated much better in this clip. Our next scenario places both us and the enemy ship moving to the right, and also getting closer together. This means we'll have to both lead the ship in the direction of travel, as well as aiming underneath him, to account for us getting closer together. Aiming these shots is rather tricky, but luckily, practice makes perfect. Our last scenario has both us and the enemy getting closer together, except we are travelling in different directions. I am travelling east, and he is travelling west. This means we'll have to aim underneath the ship, as well as quite far to the left of him. This is because we are now having to take the momentum of both ships into account. This pretty much covers aiming in naval combat. There are no real hacks for getting better, but it does get quite intuitive to aim after a few games, so don't be put off if you want a sharpshooter in your first match. Speaking of matches, we're almost ready to get into a game, but there are a few more game mechanics left to cover. The first is the crew count levels. In a game, you can take a look down in the bottom left and see a percentage. To put it simply, this indicates the percentage of spare crew you have left on board the ship. You could think of this as a health bar, and while it technically isn't, it pretty much acts like one. When your crew percent drops down below 10%, you have very few crew left to do things such as reload the guns, repair damage, and put out fires. And when the crew percent hits 0, you die. As I say, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but for a beginner player, treating this crew percentage as your health bar is a good first step to understanding the mechanics of naval battles. We then go on to firefighting. This mechanic only comes into play when, you guessed it, you're on fire. For us, we set this to our 6 key. Fires on board a ship will spread if you don't extinguish them, and will actively kill crew members, so putting them out is quite a high priority. Our next kill is damage repair, and as you can see from this clip, that lovely plane just knocked out our front forward gun turret. Like tanks, ships have internal components that can be destroyed, such as guns, turret rings, engines and rudders. When these components break, you are unable to use them until they have been repaired. If you are in a gunnery duel and your gun is knocked out, it leaves you at a huge disadvantage. We bound the 7 key to our damage repair function. While most components of a ship can be repaired, a round striking your ammunition stores will instantly destroy it, and will result in an immediate destruction of your vehicle. And yes, it's just as annoying in naval as it is in tank battles. We then come on to the unwatering skill. This is bound to our 8 key on our keyboard. When a ship takes hits, you can see that the rounds physically cause damage to a ship's hull. These breaches of the hull let in water and cause flooding. Over time, this will sink the ship if you don't seal these breaches, and then pump out the water. This is what the unwatering mechanic does. As I said, this is our 8 key, and make sure you do use this button, or you'll end up turning into a battleship-sized submarine. That covers all our movement, gunnery and in-game mechanics. There's just 2 things left before we get into a game: ammunition and game modes. To be brief, ammunition is split into 2 categories: high explosive and armour piercing. We'll start with high explosives, as these are what you'll be mainly using in the early destroyers. High explosive is typically your stock round. It contains explosive filler and detonates upon impact. This does huge damage against lightly armoured targets, but against more larger heavily armoured targets, they are pretty useless. High explosive base fuse is essentially a copy of the first round, except the fuse is located at the base of the shell or the back of the shell, meaning it does not detonate immediately upon impact. This allows the shell to somewhat penetrate the enemy's hull before exploding. If the round manages to penetrate, this does cause huge damage, but again, against more heavily armoured opponents, it often cannot penetrate. The high explosive timed fuse round is your early war anti-air protection. It uses a manual fuse which is set by your crew, and is therefore a little underwhelming. The late war anti-aircraft round is a high explosive variable time shell. This is essentially a proximity fused warhead. It detonates when travelling close to an enemy aircraft, causing massive damage. It can also be used against lightly armoured targets such as light cruisers and destroyers. We then move on to the semi-armour piercing shell, and the first of our armour piercing rounds. This round is basically a high explosive base fuse shell with a ballistic cap slapped on the front of it. This does give it higher penetration for the cost of some explosive filler. These rounds are most useful against light cruisers, but for more lightly armoured targets, they can punch right through without detonating. We then have the armour piercing high explosive, armour piercing capped, and finally the armour piercing capped ballistic cap shells. All 3 of these rounds essentially do the same thing. They have high penetration with fairly low explosive filler. These rounds should only be used against heavily armoured opponents, such as the dreadnoughts or German heavy cruisers. Using these rounds against light targets will result in the shell over penetrating and causing minimal damage. To summarise, against destroyers and other light vessels, use high explosive and high explosive variable timed. Against light cruisers and American and British heavy cruisers, semi-armor piercing is best to deal with these. For German and Japanese heavy cruisers, as well as dreadnoughts, armor piercing shells should be used. We're now going to quickly cover naval battle modes, of which there are 3. But before that, it's important to know that naval matches are won by draining the enemy's tickets. Tickets can be seen at the top of the screen in the form of 2 bars. Every time a friendly player dies, his team will lose some tickets, and every time your team gets a kill, the enemy's team will lose some tickets. Different ship classes also have different spawn points. Smaller ships will spawn closer to the shallows of a map, with larger ships spawning far out in the ocean. This is a good thing, as in most matches it allows smaller ships to directly fight other smaller ships, at least until the mid-game, where the larger ships have sailed closer into the map. The first battle mode is Domination. This is essentially the same as Tank Domination. There are 3 cap circles on the map, and a team that holds a majority of one will slowly drain the enemy's tickets. This is the most common and, in my opinion, the best battle mode currently in Naval. The next game mode is Conquest. This is similar to Domination, except there is a single large cap zone in the centre of the map. This game mode is a little frustrating, as you spawn within close range of enemy ships. This is particularly bad if you're up tiered, as you will be immediately engaged by larger ships. The last game mode is Encounter. This map has no cap circles, and is basically just a large team deathmatch, with the only objective being killing enemy players, as well as destroying their AI shipping. And with that, we've pretty much covered everything. You're now ready to get into a game and try out Naval. If you think I've missed anything or have made a mistake, please feel free to leave a comment below. Also, if you have any questions, drop us a comment and I'll try to answer it. Finally, once again, I highly recommend checking out Flipstug's channel. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if I did my job correctly, hopefully you should have learned something new about this game mode. If you do enjoy these sorts of videos, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing. But more importantly lads, I hope you have a great day, and thank you very much for watching.